Welcome back, dear viewers. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching the press review segment in this edition of The Breakfast Show. We're going to be taking a look at the major headlines in the Egyptian dailies. But first, let me welcome our guest for today, Mrs. Nafisal Sabagh. She's a political commentator. First of all, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us on The Breakfast Show.
Good morning.
Dear viewers, all the papers published today focused on the main event in Egypt, which is the second phase of the parliamentary elections, which started on Sunday inside Egypt. And as usual, we start with Al-Ahram's main page, and we read an increase in the percentage of voting in the second phase of the parliamentary elections. The international mission says the voting is taking place amid calm, secured and organized atmosphere. The Sisi casts his vote in Heliopolis. The Prime Minister says all support to carry out the last step of the political roadmap, and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar stands in the line of voters before the polling station. And dear viewers, still with the same issue, but from El Masri Al-Yawm, and we read Sisi casts his vote before the Committee of the Presidents in Heliopolis and shakes the hand of the daughter of the former public prosecutor who fell martyr. Mrs. Sisi also casts her vote 15 minutes after the departure of the president. Former President Adli Mansour casts his vote and calls on every Egyptian to participate. Also, the African Democratic Electoral Institution is following up with the voting process in the second phase of the parliamentary elections in 9 governorates out of the 13 where the second phase is taking place. The institution will hold a press conference on December 3rd to announce its primary report. And as we said, dear viewers, this main event is being focused on in all the Egyptian dailies, and with the same issue, but from Al-Yawm Al-Sabah. This time we read, the next parliament will not be dissolved. An increase in the percentage of participating than in the first phase, and Semah Saif al-Yazal challenges the House of Representatives shall continue the 5 years term, and President Sisi cast his vote for the first time at 9 a.m. before a committee headed by the daughter of late public prosecutor Hisham Barakat, and voting of expats is better than the first phase. The foreign ministry says no obstacles in the country that have security problems, and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi cast his vote on Sunday in Masr Gedida school. Also, the Minister of Local Development, Ahmed Zaki Badr, said that the preparations for the vote had been concluded at the polling centers, and the cabinet has set up operation rooms to follow up with the electoral process in the 13 governorates. And dear viewers, we have a report looking into the process and the developments of the elections, the second phase of the elections, of the parliamentary elections. Let's take a look, and we'll be back to resume the press review on The Breakfast Show.
Resume voting on Monday in the second phase of elections that are meant to restore Parliament after a more than 3-year gap. The elections have been hailed as a milestone on the roadmap to democracy. Voting takes place in 13 governorates, including the capital, Cairo. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi cast his ballot at a school in Cairo soon after voting opened at 9 a.m. 0700 GMT on Sunday. The government announced it was giving public sector workers half a day off on Monday to encourage them to cast their ballots. Egypt's last parliament was elected in 2011-2012, in the first election after the uprising that ended Hosni Mubarak's 30-year rule. A court dissolved that parliament in mid-2012. The new parliament will contain 568 elected members, 448 elected on an individual basis, and 120 through winner-takes-all lists. The head of state may appoint up to a further 28 lawmakers. On Sunday and Monday, candidates will be vying for 222 individual seats and 60 list seats. Egyptians have participated in 2 presidential elections, 2 parliamentary elections, and 3 constitutional referendums since the 2011 uprising.
Welcome back, dear viewers. Mrs. Nafisa, if you can tell us your comments, and you've been observing, of course, the first day of the elections. How do you see the electoral process on the second phase?
The major note is basically the increase in the numbers of the voters. It was sort of expected to some extent, because there are some governorates in the second phase that are normally go voting with heavy numbers, more than other governorates, such as in Cairo itself and Manufaya, for example. So what's very important is that the security status in Sinai that we have witnessed during the yesterday. So the process went smoothly in a very sensitive area in Egypt, which is very good for now.
Yes.
I hope it would, I'm expecting it should go the same way today as well.
And
So-
do you think the decision by the Egyptian cabinet to give a half day off for the employees, do you think it will further boost the number of voters?
Normally it does. If it is half a day, it does, because normally they are out. So when they are back, on their way back, they just go and vote. If it's one day off, so they will not go voting. So actually, I think it would give a push to the numbers of the people and make it easier for them actually as well. The other point, I think that the violations of the process that are being witnessed in different police stations about this buying votes, which is increasing as well.
So did
I
you
think
observe a lot of irregularities?
it's much more than the first phase, the first round. So which can be sort of expected or logical based on the candidates were very afraid of losing the votes, so they are trying with money to buy more, to guarantee more votes. And actually there are so many numbers of candidates for every parliamentary seat for the individual.
So do you think that after two revolutions, the Egyptians now are aware of who, of making a good or a correct choice, or do you think that they fall in this trap once again of money, influence, and corruption, and so on?
I think it's not about the falling in the trap. By the way, it's about, you know, trying to make a better choice every time than the time before. And I think every process we come out of it with a new learned lesson, and this is what's happening. So we cannot say that there is a correct and wrong choice in the electoral process. It's experience accumulating one time after the other. Still, the violations will continue. In other elections, you will find it, but in a very different and sophisticated way. For example, maybe it happened through media, not through direct paying to the people, the voters. So it would be there, but what's good is that the Egyptians actually have a different point of view about what's happening. Sometimes they feel desperate, but sometimes they feel, okay, we can do something. We can push things forward.
And moving on to Al-Ahram, and we read, the president tackles the developments in the region and enhancing strategic ties with the leaders of the U.S. Congress. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met on Sunday with members of the U.S. Congress delegation currently visiting Egypt. President al-Sisi held two different meetings, the first with the Republican Senator Robert Corker, head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the U.S. Senate. He then met with the head of the Subcommittee for Europe and Euro-Asia at the U.S. Congress, together with head of the Military Service Committee, Tulsi Gabbard, and the meeting was attended by the U.S. Ambassador to Egypt. And from Al-Ahram, also we read that the president tackles the strategy of developing the industry and trade sectors. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Sunday highlighted the roles played by industry and trade in boosting the national economy. The president's statements came during his meeting with the Minister of Trade and Industry, Tariq Qabil, who presented the ministry's plan for the upcoming 3 years to develop industry and trade in Egypt. Mrs. Nafisa, your comment on both meetings, one regarding the U.S. Congress and the other with the President, with the Minister of Trade and Industry, in which the Minister has presented the ministry's plan for the upcoming 3 years, the significance of both meetings.
Actually, for both meetings, I have a little problem with reading them, because there is not enough info about the details of the meeting that had came out. Maybe the official entity or institution issues a very broad statement that can be happening in many places, but actually, as a journalist, our rule is to get out more
what's
information.
Behind, what's between the lines.
So until now, what kind of plan had been discussed between the president and the minister? No details had been declared. I think even if it's not declared, we should go and ask for more information about the details, so that you can say anything about that. But as for the meeting with the U.S. Congress members, for sure it should have been tackled, the situation about combating terrorism in the world.
Yes.
Because
and do you think that it has anything to do with the elections? As it coincides with the first day?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe I can link it more to the attacks in Paris, the Russian rule in against Daesh in
what's happening
Syria,
also in Brussels,
and what's happening in Europe and the United States about the new terrorism threats against different countries. So I think it's about linking with Egypt to more and more details.
Well, our next headline has more to do with the terrorism, and it's also from Al-Ahram's front page. The Egyptian Foreign Minister, Shukri, says we should deal with terrorism in a complete and comprehensive way. The Foreign Minister held a number of press interviews with official Korean media outlets upon his arrival in the capital, Seoul. In the interviews, Shukri tackled the current preparations for President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to visit South Korea. He also discussed bilateral relations and means of enhancing South Korean investments and tourism in Egypt. Shukri kicked off an Asian tour which takes him to South Korea and Japan for talks on political and economic relations. The top diplomat is also set to hold talks with a number of senior Korean government officials to discuss bilateral relations. In Japan, Shukri will meet with officials from the Japanese Agency for International Cooperation and the Bank of Japan. Mrs. Nafisa, also a very important visit. The Foreign Minister is performing some preparatory meetings for the visit of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And do you think that this is also a new page in the relations and in Egypt's foreign policy in regards to Asia and the Far East?
I don't think it's a very recent our new page, because we have started, actually, President Sisi started since more than 2 years ago. So all the time we started to play differently on the international arena. We started to have different relations, different visits to different players and different economic blocks in the world. So it's part of what have been started, actually, and we can say it's very important. If you it's very important to Egypt to have different relation to different international players, whether they are the bigger one or the medium players. At the end, it gives you more power. And recently, actually, the Japanese Development Agency is more active in Egypt and in the Middle East. So having a more political relation, concrete political relation, close political relation with them would be much more important now.
Yes, and the last item we chose for today, dear viewers, comes from also from Al-Ahram's front page, and we read, Medvedev calls for uniting the efforts to face Daesh. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon cooperate in rooting out terrorism. Dear viewers, let's take a look at this report, and we'll be back.